my name is Natalia Ouellette, and I'm an attorney at RTR Law, practicing real estate law. And today I have a Q&A for investors with Erik Del'etoile, who practices employment law. And the topic of today's conversation is the difference between having an independent contractor and having an employee. Part of the issue that I see with real estate investors is that they will have somebody that they contract as like a runner or like their secretary to run paperwork, things like that. But in the grand scheme of things, are they actually having an independent contractor relationship, or are they having an employment relationship? And what are some of the issues that could arise out of that? So without further ado, Erik, you are free to present yourself, your business, and then we'll go from there.
Thank you. Erik Del'etoile. I'm an attorney here at RTR Law, Rifkin, Thompson, Rodzinski. I'm the managing attorney of the employment law division. And I'd say right now, especially with everything going on COVID related, a lot of the calls and questions I'm getting are very much related to the difference between an employee and an independent contractor. Why it's important to be classified as one or the other, pros, cons, what are some of the negatives that employers face if they misclassify an individual. So yeah, it's a very important topic to cover right now.
Okay, perfect. So here is like my number one question that is relevant to the investor community is, what is the difference between an employee, like a basic difference between an employee and an independent contractor?
Great question. And there's no real direct and easy answer, but what it comes down to is control. If the employer has control over the individual, then they're going to be considered an employee. And so what control means is control over the means and methods to accomplish the goal or the job. An independent contractor is just that. They're independent. They get to decide when they want to do the work, how they want to do the work, what they want to wear, what tools, have they been trained. They are independent. An employee is someone who has to show up at an office, use the employer's tools. This is how we're going to train you. You need to get the job done Monday through Friday between 8 and 5. An employer controls an employee. They do not control an independent contractor. So it all comes down to the level of control. Now there can be certain levels of control, because obviously when you're hiring an independent contractor, you want them to perform a certain job a certain way. You need a result.
Right.
And so the result can be controlled by an employer. But the means and methods of accomplishing that result is what is going to differentiate between an independent contractor and an employee.
Okay. So I'm going to give you an example of like a typical relationship between a real estate investor and the people in his group.
Okay.
Let's say I am an investor who has a bunch of rental properties. And so I have one particular guy that I use to check out all the rental properties, collect the rents for the month, post notices regarding eviction or being overdue or being delinquent in some other aspect of the lease agreement. How would you perceive that relationship?
Right, and so what it does is it comes down to the level of control the investor has over that individual. Are they saying you need to wear a shirt with my logo on it and only show up between 8 and 12 and follow these guidelines with a questionnaire that I have provided for you? Or do they say, this is what we need done, you do it at your leisure. Show up whenever you feel it's convenient to show up. Use your own equipment, so cameras to take pictures or your own tools to get something done. Do it at your own time. But an employer can say, I need this by 5 o'clock on Friday. But then it's up to the contractor, what order they want to go to these properties, how they want to handle going out to those properties. As long as the independent contractor has their own discretion in how they are doing the job, that's what makes them independent.
Okay. And then as far as how you pay them, there really is no difference in terms of like, okay, if you give them a 1099 statement or a W-2 statement at the end of the year, their treatment is based on that control.
Right.
Okay.
Right, and so it's very important though, employers, that's why they like independent contractors. You're not taking out taxes. You don't have to worry about those sorts of things. It's, hey, here's this job, I'll pay you $1,000 for it, boom, end of story. Not worried about any sort of taxes or Medicare, Social Security, none of that. That is completely on the independent contractor at the end of the year to report accordingly.
Okay, and then for those business owners that have created a little office, set up something like that, the people that they're having come in regularly, those are people that they definitely need to be treating like an employee, or realizing that they're an employee under the rules.
Right. So, and again, it's all about this control. How much control do they want or have? As an employer or as an investor, do you want to be able to say, I need you here 3 days a week, 5 days a week, you cannot go work for somebody else? You know, an independent contractor can do this for 10 different investors. But if you're an investor and you say, I want you to work solely for me, and you cannot work anybody else, and I want you to come to my office 5 days a week, if you can't come, you need to get approval. That is the kind of control that's going to make somebody an independent contractor.
Perfect. Okay. And then what are some of the risks of, let's say, having a runner, another person that you use to, again, talk to your tenants or talk to occupants in properties that you've just acquired? What are some of the risks in them going out there, doing a task that you've assigned and getting into an accident?
Sure. So an independent contractor is awarded no benefits from the employer. And benefits include multiple things, including workers' compensation. An employer does not have to give workers' comp coverage to an independent contractor. As an independent contractor, since you have discretion over the means and methods of accomplishing the tasks, if you get injured, car accident, a tenant attacks you, a dog comes running out of one of the units and bites you, that is on you. The employer is not going to cover that under any sort of workers' comp because you're an independent contractor. If there's enough control where you're an employee, then yes, you would be covered under workers' compensation coverage.
Okay. And let's say somebody is deemed to be your employee and the way in which they communicate with a tenant or an occupant causes some sort of litigation.
Sure.
At that end, like how do you explain the agency relationship consequences?
Yeah, so I mean, an employee, and that's why employees are generally trained by an employer to do things the way the employer wants them to do. So if you're an employee and you're going out there doing that, it's up to the employer to explain to the employee, you work for me. You're not working on your own. You're working for my company. You're working for myself. You need to do things the way I'm telling you to do them. If you mess up with that and it creates some sort of liability, you know, you're going to be fired from your job potentially. But yeah, any sort of litigation that's going to result from an employee's conduct at one of those, it's going to be against the investor, against the employer. That's why a lot of the times these investors and employers would much rather have that individual be an independent contractor as opposed to an employee.
Right. That's part of the, what's key there too. In regards to the CARES Act, as far as employees go, what are some of the requirements for small businesses in terms of the kind of coverage or vacation or sick leave that applies?
So the CARES Act only covers employees who have between 50 and 500 employees. For that size business, it is automatically applies. Now, if you're at 50 and below, there is an exemption. The way it's worded is for employers with 500 and below. But if you're a small business and giving this sick leave is going to put you out of business, you can actually contact the Treasury Department and request a leave or request an exemption from the CARES Act. If you're not exempt and you're a small business, what you have to know is if an employee they don't have to have contracted COVID, but they could be self-isolating because they were in contact with somebody, or they could be caring for a child whose school or daycare may be closed because of COVID. That is going to entitle them to this FMLA sick leave through the CARES Act. Now, what it says is you are entitled to 2 weeks of pay at 100% rate of pay. But then if you are still affected by the CARES Act, meaning your child's school is closed because of it, you could be entitled up to another 12 weeks, but only at 66% of your pay, or 2/3 of your pay. But the school has to be closed. So just because your child may have to do e-learning, that means the school is open. So you would not now be entitled to this sick leave under the CARES Act.
Oh, that's very important distinction to know. Okay, right. And then, in your opinion, the cost of having to litigate an employment law dispute versus, for example, engaging the services of an employment law attorney to implement those practices into your business so that you know full well, like, here's how I'm going to treat my independent contractors, here's how I'm going to treat my employees. What are some of the cost differences there? Sure.
So anytime litigation is involved, the costs are astronomical. You know, an attorney is billing by the hour, and those hours add up quickly. Well, what I would say is, as an employer, if you have employees, most employers have employment liability insurance. And so a lot of those insurances have deductibles. So until you meet that deductible, you're going to be on the hook, maybe $15,000, maybe $25,000, depending on how much your deductible is. And then your insurance is going to go up if you have to make a claim on it, and attorneys get provided. Or you could hire an attorney to draft a handbook. maybe create some policies for you that set out the way your company is going to run. That is much, much cheaper than having to fight somebody in court because there was confusion over those policies, because you didn't treat people the same way. It is way cheaper to have your ducks in a row early on than dealing with the problem after the fact. Having your company set up, knowing the rules, knowing the law, knowing the policies is just going to save you so much money down the long road if something were to happen.
And so the last question that I have is, how do the people in the investor community, how can they reach you? What's the best way to reach your firm?
Sure. RTRlaw.com makes it real easy. My phone number, 813-370-0229. But just going to RTR Law, my name's Eric. It's probably a lot easier than remembering a phone number. And my name and number is on the firm.
Thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Natalia.
Thank you, and good luck out there, investors.